So hi, I'm Conor Ward. I'm Global Head of UX and Design for Centrica, who own British Gas, amongst a whole bunch of other energy companies across the world. What else? Yeah, what else do you want to know? So how did I get here? Train, I guess. Tube today. I don't know. So everybody's background is really different in here, which is I think makes the kind of design and research environment a really interesting one. I came through the creative disciplines, played music and stuff, and then got back into the scientific side of things. And my kind of interest in today's discussion is all the digital transformation things, and certainly the human side of it. So this is a kind of a perfect discussion for me.
Great, thanks.
Good enough intro?
Oh, perfect. Aleks.
So I'm Aleks. I'm an experienced. Does that work? Yeah. Does that? Okay. I'm an experienced design director at a company called Radley Yeldar. We are a design and communications company that is doing anything from pretty much events to digital products to apps and so on. However, we're still young in the digital sense, so I was brought on board to deliver the digital transformation in there, because they originated as a print agency, and I'm sure a lot of you kind of know the story, how that goes and how at times challenging and difficult can be to turn that around. So that's what I'm doing now. My background is in both fine arts and service design, which is quite an interesting mix, and I love mixing up arts into anything I do. So that's me.
Great stuff, thanks. Ollie?
Is this, yeah. Okay, my background's probably a little bit more mongrel or hybrid, depending on how you want to look at it. So I'm currently head of the UK for Idean, so we're just starting a new studio here. I guess some of my experience is really around how to understand how to integrate design agencies into consulting companies and tech companies that acquire them. This is the third time that I've done this. Previously I was working at Designit as the Global Service Design Director, helping them integrate into Wipro, a large IT company. Previous to that, I joined Fjord 1 month after Accenture acquired them, and went around the world with Fjord, helping them integrate into Accenture. And all along, really, the goal here was to sort of how to do large-scale digital transformation, business transformation in different markets around the world. I spent the last 4 years living out of a suitcase. I didn't actually have an apartment, traveling around the world, either doing some research or setting up studios in different markets, from Australia to Asia to the Middle East, South America, doing different digital transformation projects at different epic scales around the world.
Brilliant, thanks, Ollie. I'm going to go straight in for the kill with this. So digital transformation, what does it mean to you? And are we all going to be replaced by AI? Who'd like to go first?
No.
No one to go first?
Both questions. I guess for me, the definition of digital transformation is a weird one. Lots of people think it talks about things like AI and chatbots and Internet of Things and all that kind of stuff. And for me, it's not. It's what you just mentioned a second ago. It's business transformation, right? It just happens to be, pushed or through a digital medium and using the capabilities of digital to have feedback from humans in a quicker manner. Than the long-term industrial type feedback we used to have. The long-term, build a product, launch the product, see how it works, right? Which takes months or years. So the digital kind of medium allows that second by second or minute by minute feedback, and that's why I believe this kind of term has come by. Digital transformation is it allows companies to rethink themselves to a more kind of human-centered manner. So I think a lot of the stuff that I don't have a pop at consultancy too much. I'll try my best. But you see a lot of the consultancy kind of the nice little shiny PDFs they produce with diagrams of how you do digital. If you type in digital transformation to Twitter, you'll see what I'm talking about. There's lots of diagrams that say you should do these things, and it's like number 3 is do a chatbot, number 4 is do some Alexa skill or something. I don't know. And then like number 8, you've transformed digitally. Well done. And it's not really, the case. It's not a checklist of doing some output. It's the activity, and it's the human-centered activity, not just outside of the company, but I think priority. It's the how the employees change and how they change their mindsets and how they believe in digital and in gaining feedback from customers quickly. That's my, in a nutshell, opinion of what digital transformation is.
And I think to build on what you said, Conor, digital transformation is also an opportunity for business to, first of all, adjust to the reality and also innovate. So a lot of them are kind of doing things with inertia. And for me, that transformation is also an opportunity to review a lot of things that they're doing and to align it to whatever the future they want, rather than the future that they're kind of on a course to meet just because there is this inertia of a snowball of a business that started a while ago. And sometimes, like in our case, for example, profitable business. So there's no need for digital transformation. It's just understanding that, what you said, that this is a chance to align with what people need, with how all the internal structures can work. It's actually quite a good chance for a lot of businesses to review what they're doing. It's a little bit about business becoming sustainable and business becoming accountable, to your kind of earlier point and question around ethics and around how do we do things and why we do them within the business as well. So I think at the moment, actually, it's a very exciting time. It's a brilliant time to kind of use a transformation as a tool in a way to become more ethical and more accountable. So that's what it is for me.
I think just building on that a bit more, I'd say that, I guess, to this audience and the people in the room, if you're working in digital now or you have been for a while, you understand that digital's a great kind of provocative marketing term for what we do, but really what we're doing is transforming businesses, changing processes, reimagining how things should work and how things need to drive better value or better impact or just be a better experience. The digital is like a small part of that when you start bringing in the broader context of really what we're doing and also what it takes to get out of the door and into the marketplace, to your point. I think sort of going back to the other point around looking at, are we all going to be out of a job? Well, I'd say yes, we should all be out of a job. It should be industrialized. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be in a job. It means we need to evolve what we're doing, evolve how we're doing it. And quite honestly, I'm fine for you to have a pop at consultants. If consultants are delivering PowerPoints and PDFs, then we're not really transforming anything. It's really about how do you make something as real, as quick as possible so you can validate it, improve it, and then how do you really understand the impacts? And a lot of what I'm doing in the workshop is trying to understand unintended consequences this afternoon. So when you design a new digital product or when you implement a new digital platform, there's a huge ricochet of human impacts that come off of that. Do the employees need to be retrained in how to use it? Do the sales team need to be sort of repositioned in how to sort of put their propositions out there? And how does that start impacting both the HR, the finance, like every different traditional area of the business? It's not just about putting a new product out there. It's not just about putting a new platform in place to make something more efficient or to reduce the cost in a business or to increase the revenue. It's really every different interconnected part of the business, which is where service design and organizational design need to be sort of evolving to and moving to, is understanding a lot of the broader implications of that. So in one sense, yes, we should be out of a job. In another sense, actually, our jobs should radically change to better understand how to sort of deliver this kind of value.
That's great, thanks, Ollie. Are any of you seeing sort of a bias in the convergence of people, technology, and business needs? Have you got any sort of views on what's happening in that space for digital transformation? Is there one? Do you see one being kind of driven more so? I guess this is around the human element, but the concept of tech for tech's sake, for example.
We very often do see it with our clients. So they come to us with already a solution or something that within technology that is technology driven. And it's usually mega complex, very difficult to use. And they're really, really proud of it. And they're just asking for to communicate it better. Where we look at the core of the problem and we say, well, actually, does this work? And do you even need that kind of a step back? So for me, the human element should always be driving it. But unfortunately, a lot of times when we're into the process, it's already there is something in the world designed and built, and it does need to be kind of stripped back to its core in that sense. So that's within the project. Within organizations, same thing. I mean, how many of the softwares and things, when I just joined, had enormous amount of existing kind of softwares and things running at the background that people struggle to use. And simplifying that takes, it's all part of that transformation within the organization itself to help the clients understand that as well. And once you kind of align the internal processes, it starts working for external. Human has to be at the core of it. I don't think it's at the moment, unfortunately, with many organizations.
Yeah, I mean, just building on that, I think it's the starting point. So the starting point comes in lots of different ways. It can come from a technical need. It can come from a new product need. It does rarely come from a human need, and I think that's great. That's why we're all going to have jobs for quite a while to sort of really champion that side of it. I think going through, at the end of the day, it always comes back to a commercial or business imperative. Sometimes that's very disguised, sometimes that's very removed from where you can get to, but like the reason for doing a digital transformation, the reason for a new product, the reason for all of these things, there's a commercial benefit somewhere. Understanding that gives you a lot better leverage into how to design a better human experience. The moment that you can start talking in the terms of the business language, the more sort of power you can gain by really pushing a human agenda or making it very employee experience driven or customer experience driven and highlighting the importance of that.
Great, thanks, Ollie. And so just building on that, how do we sort of ensure that sort of cultural shifts in organizations can keep up with the advancement of technology?
Yeah, I mean, so I think the best definition of kind of company culture I've heard is culture is how companies make decisions, right? It's not some intangible thing that you can wear flip-flops and play ping pong. That's not really a culture. It's how decisions are made. The ping pong's just a nice extra, right? So if you're trying to transform a company to be more human-centered and to focus on digital as its primary method of gaining that feedback, I think trying to look at how they make decisions. It's not necessarily an organizational structure issue, although it does kind of roll into that at a certain point. But it's how the decision's made. Is it just from a top-down point of view? Is it kind of, do the people at the top, do they actually have contact with the users, the customers, the humans that you're trying to provide something to? And if not, how do you? I mean, that's the transformation, right? How do you kind of set that up? Those guys don't really have diaries that would allow that kind of activity to happen. So the normal kind of transformation around that is, instead of bringing the users to the authority, it's bring the authority to the information, right? So there's a whole talk about this on YouTube if you want to have a look at it. It's called Bringing Information to the Authority. It's a great talk. It's not mine. It's just a great talk. And that talks about giving the authority to the people that are closest to the humans that they're providing something to, because they have the information. They understand the detail of what's needed. And so trying to transform a company to set up that as an allowed activity, especially our company's 300 years old, right? So it's or 200 or something. It's a very difficult transformation to try and achieve, and it goes against everything you'd learn in business school, right? You don't get an MBA by saying give away all of your decision-making rights. That's the opposite of what you're taught. So I think that's one of the most interesting transformations we're trying to kind of impart across the company at the moment is to give not necessarily autonomy, but to give control to the people that are doing the work, and then there's just like a nice feedback loop. There's a governance feedback loop rather than a top-down push towards a solution, as was mentioned. So that's kind of, I think that's really interesting.
I mean, it's one of my favorite topics, looking at the cultural shift. Without sort of upsetting too much of the technology teams that work on these things, actually the technology is an easier part to transform, even with all of its legacy systems and even with all of the integration and risk and regulation challenges. The technology is an easier shift to make than the cultural shift, shifting an employee's mindset, shifting an entire organization's mindset to make a transformation sustainable and maintainable is a much harder challenge, because then you get into really sort of how people are working, how they're remunerated, all of the different aspects that go into the human side of a shift. And I mean, for one of the things, projects I was doing, we were transforming how technicians work in Australia, who go out in vans and sort of install things. And we were designing new products and new tools for them to use that integrated better into the back office system so that they could do a more effective role and actually to make their lives easier. But then when you start thinking about how do you convince 4,000 working technicians across Australia that this new app is going to help change their lives for the better, they're already busy, they've got other stuff, it's not their top priority. How do you engage them enough that they want to be part of this journey? How do you engage them enough that an MVP is actually good enough working for them that it can do their job without sort of costing them time, costing them effort, and actually it can grow with them? How do you get them to feel like they're part of that journey? Which is a much more challenging shift than actually issuing 4,000 iPads that are all pre-installed across Australia for them to use. While that was quite challenging in itself. So I think the bigger part there is just the cultural shift is the real challenge. The technology shift is a challenge, but that kind of ends at a certain point once it's implemented. The cultural shift takes a lot longer to ingrain and sort of become sustainable.
Absolutely, and just to add on the cultural shift, I guess for me, and I'm new in the transformation business. It's kind of the first business where I'm participating and I'm leading it. For me, the interesting thing was around identifying what you're not going to be able to transform immediately. So kind of in a way picking battles, and within that kind of cultural shift, seeing who is absolutely, your absolute edge use case that is not going to come on board by, any direct impact, and just mapping out the actual structure of organization in terms of the culture. That was very, very interesting, and great learning from that. Is that, again, picking battles and seeing how you can impact organization, that's also a strategy in itself. It's not kind of just a process that you start and finish at some point.
Great, thanks, Aleks. Talking of picking battles, who'd like to see these guys have the debate about sort of client side versus agency? Should we dig into that a little bit more? So I'd like Conor to go first because I know he's quite opinionated on it. So off you go, mate.
I'm opinionated about everything.
Can an agency truly impact or transform?
Well, so my background is both. I've done client side and agency side work. I guess it depends, what the agency are doing, and whether they're actually embedded and have authority. I think most of the time that's not the case. It's advisory to a degree, or it's siloed in its kind of realm of authority, which I guess is kind of true if you're working inside the company too, right? You don't kind of have authority across the whole company, but it's probably easier. So the reason why I moved from agency work to client-side work was to have that ongoing authority to kind of push beyond the delivery of something into sort of a continuous improvement cycle, and being able to gain long-term trust of kind of stakeholders and important people across the company that can believe in the ongoing improvement of something, and for me, that's how you do transformation is continual, rather than a kind of a big bang kind of land of something that here's now we've transformed everybody. Ta-da! Doesn't exactly I think work that way. So I guess my answer is kind of a mixed one. It's kind of no, agencies can't do it, but maybe they can. But if they're there and they're part of the company and they're seen as giving the authority to make the decisions and the changes rather than as an advisory capacity. That's a little bit more diplomatic than I'm used to being.
Can I go to Ollie first? Because we can get deeper into it. I know because you're in a unique position, Aleks, so I'm going to ask Ollie to go next. So.
I've done both as well, and I have mixed opinions on it. I think, echoing a lot of what Conor was saying, actually, I think, if I was just imagining the kind of metaphor of like a paper boy or something, like to someone distributing flyers, it's not like, here's a project for you, and a project for you, and a project for you. That doesn't really create any value. That's just sort of an agency comes in, throws around some projects, creates some sort of sparkle magic, and then it fades and disappears as they do. The real opportunity and the real sort of way of driving some value and impact is about becoming more engaged, more embedded. I like to try and think of it more like creating capabilities and then making yourself redundant, or as a friend was telling me, sort of burning that platform and creating another one on. So how do you create a capability within the organization and then sort of make yourself redundant, replacing yourself so that that capability can be grown and taken on? For a slightly different view, there's the external provocateur. sometimes internally due to hierarchical organizations and the way that they're structured, you do need an external entity to come in and sometimes say almost the same thing as the internal team, just to prove the point, just to be provocative, and almost just to actually be the person that can be the messenger that's shot, so that the internal structure survives and does things. But sometimes you do need an external entity to come in to sort of really push the needle on those things. So in two senses, I think there's a benefit of having the external agency to provoke things. I think to do good work, you need to be building capabilities that can be sustained and run internally in the long run. And it really is about collaboration. The larger scale projects, the larger scale organizations, there's a lot to do to transform. And I think it's really how do you create that critical mass, that momentum to do a bigger transformation.
Absolutely. Well, I kind of am that agency in one person, so it's really hard for me to answer from the other side. But it's exactly in terms of what you said, Ole. I think it's exactly right. You're kind of building that system, not accounting for your participation in the future in a way. You're kind of building that system that will work, and ideally, when you step away from it, it's going to be well running and much better than in the state that you found it in. So that's ideally how it would work. And through the process, yes, I definitely assure you from like the agency side, you are going to be pushing, you're not going to be liked, you're going to be someone who brings change, and no one likes change, no one at all, and it is hard. And I think the benefit that the agencies have is that, again, it's an outsider coming in, not being liked, and not being, not kind of ruining the internal initial company culture. It's a change brought from outside. I think that's why, in many ways, it's a little bit easier, perhaps, to take, because it's complete outsider's view, it's complete outsider's assessment, and then that is going into certain processes which people say, right, yeah, we've been doing things for 30, 40, 200 years. We may as well need change. We may as well listen to someone. If you're an internal person and you've been saying same things for ages, chances are that you probably won't get that much exposure and that much. And it's just about bringing power to the right ideas. It's just about driving them. All those ideas already exist within the business. I'm quite sure you would agree with that, but they not necessarily get the right exposure. They not necessarily get the right, strategy and the right tactics behind to execute that. So I guess this is why the benefit of someone from outside.
I think that's a really interesting point about the bringing in somebody external to kind of confirm what somebody's already saying. We've definitely had that on various occasions. I think the interesting thing about that is I heard a really good quote yesterday that says that when you're talking about transformational change, it's not change people hate, it's being changed. They don't want to be changed, they want to make the change. And if you're somebody that's trying to make change and somebody else is making you change, it's not so nice, right? And so it all depends, I guess, who brings in the consultant, right? Because if you bring in the consultant, brilliant. Somebody else brings in the consultant, then you're kind of immediately skeptical as to what they're going to say and are they going to agree with you and stuff. So they're definitely needed, I think, to back up the skepticism around can you transform your business from within? Because if we can, how come we haven't already? How come these people haven't already transformed their business? They're already here. So that's an interesting side of things, I guess.
Great. Does anyone jump in with any more on that front? I think you were very kind, Conor, from our phone call to.
It's early in the morning.
once the films roll in, it's. Can we maybe move on a little bit to sort of trends that you're seeing in transformation? So, what are some of the things you predict that might happen in the coming years, next 3 to 5 years, maybe?
I always have a problem with trends. It's not my favourite word. I think, there you go, see, I'm being unkind again. Yes, you better happier now. I think when it comes to output, I don't know, as in creating solutions, but certainly the service design, Aleks mentioned, viewing anything you create as a service to your customers. Whether it's a product or a service to begin with, it ideally ends up providing a service to somebody, unless it's like a can of Coke, right? You just have the product and then it's gone. So thinking about your company and trying to order yourselves around all of your activity around that service rather than the business units that you need to organize yourself around. So we mentioned kind of HR and finance and rethinking all that kind of stuff. So how come they have to be different, right? How come they have to be a separate function rather than a function around a particular service for a group of customers? So I think if we wanted to go for maybe a possible trend, it's probably the move of organizations to rethink themselves around customers rather than around business functions.
I was just going to echo that, actually. I think rather than building it around a product or a service, but more like you were saying at the end, actually building it more around the overall customer experience. There's no point putting a new product out if they're going to phone a call center when there's a problem and then they get through to some horrendous archaic system that doesn't really deliver the same thing of the new product you've put out. So really understanding that overall customer experience. I think that's probably the faster moving trend. I think the sort of growing trend behind that is looking at the employee experience and understanding how do we empower the employees in these different areas of the business to do better things, to create a better customer experience. And then that kind of just builds into this overall kind of organizational change, transformation, that's the slowest moving part of that entirely when they start looking at, well, how are they measuring their business? How are they sort of measuring success? Because really that dictates a lot of how the employees are measured and how the experience that they have, which in turn impacts the customer experience and where they prioritize and value different things from that customer experience.
I think to build on that, I guess two most important trends for me from now, if we are even calling that trends really, is the adoption of design thinking within organizations and within clients more and more, and the acceptance of failure. Like I couldn't imagine a context 5 years ago, 10 years ago, where clients would come to us and say, it's okay for you to launch an MVP and fail in the first meeting. And that is happening increasingly more now. I guess so that's generally kind of design thinking, adoption of it, and as a result of this, the easier acceptance of failure and general kind of iteration cycle. That's one. And the second one is, I guess, businesses becoming more and more accountable and sustainable. With sustainable development goals launched, we have definitely and certainly more businesses coming to us going, we do want to be conscious, we do want to be sustainable, we want to think about things like purpose and things, and why are we even here? So I think that in turn is going to make a lot of changes within that transformation cycle because, again, which is great, we're coming to the point where we're not only kind of on inertia, we're actually thinking like, why do we even do things we do? And I think for businesses, that's a major shift. And when they align themselves to global development goals, I'm certainly really happy to see that and to see more meaningful businesses running.
As you said, actually, that brings up two other trends or themes, one of which is becoming much more design-driven organizations, which, design thinking is an aspect of that, but design thinking doesn't have to be done just by designers, but you do need a strong design imperative within the organization and key designers at different parts to become more human-centric, arguably, because designers are trained to be more empathetic with employees and customers. So there's a large shift around how do you become more of a design-driven organization with C-level, board-level design leadership, growing investment in design across the business, and growing scale design across the business, not just siloed off. There's the design team. It's integrated across the board, so that's one aspect of it. And the other one was just around, I think it's the repositioning of brand and brand experience, and brands have to be a lot more transparent now. They have to have a clearer purpose. You can call brands out in social media in a lot quicker ways if they're being unethical or, unsustainable. So the real notion around, well, how does a new brand need to operate? How does a new brand need to sort of be positioned in the world when it's a lot more transparent, it's a lot more accessible, and a lot more sort of visible?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point about the design getting a kind of a seat at the table now, which it has, which is great. It's probably the reason for that is probably because so many companies have realized that they're kind of software companies, and they didn't understand that they were software companies. There's so many companies out there that kind of make products, and then they kind of made software to allow those products to function, and now they've suddenly realized, shit, we're a software company, like we make our own software, and so General Electric, GE is a perfect example of that. There's a nice podcast you can have a listen to around this, around GE and their design thinking and their digital transformation stuff they're going through recently. And they realized that while they make kind of jet engines and cars and all that kind of stuff, they make the software to make those things run. And so they're a software company and they're a technology company. And once they realize that, they've realized, God, we're one of the biggest software companies in the world. We thought we were just an engineering company. So it's really interesting to hear that kind of company realization and then understanding, well, if we're no longer an engineering company but a software company, we better consider how software is built. And obviously one of the key tenets, the sort of the three-legged stool is product engineering and software, or product engineering and design when it comes to building software. So that's why I think design has got a seat at the table and is kind of leading companies now, because it has to be considered now that they've realized they're a company they didn't think they were, which is a software company.
I think design kind of becomes much wider than it used to be. It's completely not that narrow. It's my recent most favorite quote, and I don't remember who said it a couple of days ago, was design happens whether you participate in it or not. And I think that is true for so many organizations. We just don't recognize it as design. So instead of labeling something, it has to become a much more all-encompassing process.
Great, thank you. And can we sort of like touch on that? No, I know I don't necessarily like the word trends, but like in terms of your own upskilling, what are you personally doing to sort of, you know, prepare yourself for tomorrow?
I think learning, just constantly learning. So if you wanted to use the T word again and say what's the biggest trends in companies, it's probably the companies are becoming learning companies, right? And the individuals and the employees are becoming constantly learning. So give them the freedom to fail, certainly, but not necessarily. They don't have to fail to learn, right? You can learn also by succeeding. So either way, whether you fail or succeed, you still learn. As long as you actually learn when you fail, that's the problem. So I think giving all of your kind of team members the freedom and the push to be constantly learning, and to call it when they're not, and you know, leave if they're not, because why are they there? You know, you clearly haven't provided the right environment to be constantly learning for them, and so that's what I look for in a role and in my own progression is am I learning something new? Am I pushed into a new area? Am I in the right role that I can learn? Am I in a company that is interested in learning? And if not, can I convince them that learning should be their top priority? And I think from a digital transformation point of view, that's the reason why digital transformation is being brought up at all as the way to transform your company, is because it's the fastest way to learn. It's the fastest way to get feedback about your product or from your clients. So that focus on learning for me is the most interesting trend at the moment.
More for me, I've realized there's a shift away from designing for deliverables and more about designing for value, for impact, and for outcomes, and being less precious about specific deliverables that need to come out, and really questioning, well, what's the right artifact that I need to create some more value, to create some impact, to deliver this outcome that I'm aiming to achieve for. So looking at more rapid ways of creating the right artifact to move a conversation forwards, and then constantly looking and challenging myself to evolve the skills that I have and not becoming complacent and just relying on traditional methods or traditional processes, and looking at just, well, how can we get to that answer quicker, or how can we prove this hypothesis quicker?
I guess for me it's kind of learning via doing most of the time, really. And what I've noticed with a lot of organizations, including the one that I'm at now, there is a lot of talking prior to that transformation, and talking is amazing and great, but it actually doesn't get us anywhere. So I think everything that I always encourage my teams to do is to have actions after every meeting. I'm a real pain. I do encourage them to have kind of at least action small things, start doing things rather than talking about them, putting them in, PowerPoints, PDFs, whatever. So that's part of the learning for my team. For myself, I just do pretty much everything inside and outside of the job, so I don't really make a distinction between, 6, 8 o'clock and whatever. I really love what I do, so I do a lot of it. I teach at universities and so on, so just do a lot of things in and around design, which in my, I really believe it's a much wider discipline than what it's sometimes siloed as.
Great. Is there any sort of questions from the crowd? Yeah, I'll come around and might have to borrow one of your mics in a sec, but there you go.
Ollie, I thought it was an interesting point you made about designing for deliverables, or designing deliverables towards designing outcomes and value and so on. Totally on board. How do you find communicating that to senior buyers in the client who are saying, this is great, and I totally am on board with the customer being the focus and all that, but if I'm buying your agency, I need to know what I'm getting. Well, you're getting value. Okay, but what about the deliverables? It's kind of a tough one because I'm on board with the designing for outcomes and values, but it's quite hard to convince a client to buy that. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the struggle is real. I mean, the challenge there is really, this is where it comes, you sort of upskill in understanding the business a bit more, right? What is it that your stakeholder or your client is trying to achieve? What is their timeline? When are they reporting stuff to their senior stakeholders or their, group? There's sometimes a difference between who's signing the checks within the organization and who's sort of sharing the leading the program. So really understanding the business helps you determine what are the right artifacts. And then you start challenging yourself and like, well, how early can I bring out a different type of artifact to give to this stakeholder so they can start communicating this within the business earlier? And I think then it really comes with developing the trust and the relationship with your client or with that stakeholder around, well, what is the impact you're trying to drive here? Like, what are the numbers that you need to start proving and showing, and then start really looking aggressively like, well, how quickly can we create a hypothesis? Can we validate this? If we go and make a prototype and put it in front of a load of customers, get some videos of that and some good sound bites and some good numbers around how it might work, is that going to be helpful for you? And actually maybe we can do that in, half the time and then work on developing it in more detail so you'll get your finished polished thing, but you can start communicating this earlier. Or do we need to start building some light business cases around this? Can we get access to some of the analytics and numbers and look at where we need to start making shifts? So really, that's what I'm sort of talking about. What's the right artifacts to sort of move that conversation forwards and understanding the business that you're interacting with, because that gives you more strength to go, well, to do justice to the customer and or the employee that we're designing for. How do we engage the business to see that as important as we do? And the best way to do that is understanding the business numbers that need to go with it.
Yeah, I think I've had a lot of this, both on client side and internally. I think there's two things. It's really trying to understand why are they asking you to do this and getting them to go through that exercise with you, because they've done probably a large amount of work before they've got to you to try and figure out, do their jobs well, which is figure out what we should do next. And it's difficult trying to roll them back to day one again, which is why did you start considering this? And so we have a number of methods. We have a little business canvas we use, which is, here's your prioritize the business goals for me. And it's like primary, you're only allowed one, and then some secondary and some tertiary. And then we kind of, the other side of the canvas is what do you think the user needs are? And prioritize those on how your business goals meeting the user needs. So it brings it back away from the solution and back to the problem again and trying to understand the problem that they think they have. So that's always hopefully a positive conversation. It's not necessarily one that's welcomed on day one because they think they've done all that work already. And then the second thing is when you talk about trying to convince them, it's showing, not telling, right? It's the actions rather than the conversation. And so doing all of the activity of the prototyping and whatever you can do, it's how do you get them involved in it rather than giving them the output of it. So if you're doing some research, make sure they're there, right? Make sure they're in the observation room. Make sure they're actually taking notes. Being an observer and a researcher to try and feel the pain of their customers, rather than reading a report, which they won't ever read. They'll read the executive summary, right? And then there's the bias, which you've put into the report and which they've put into reading it as well. Whereas if they're in the room, they'll be saying, "Oh, can we not do this tomorrow?" And you're like, "Yes, of course we can." And I guess it's the whenever you're filling in that kind of business canvas or having that discussion at the start, it's saying, right, if we achieve this value for you, does it matter that it's not the thing you were hoping for that we delivered? Like, what if it was something else? Would that be okay if I just know there's a weird conversation to have, right? Because maybe it's just a pet project, they want that thing, and then maybe you're in the wrong game, or you just have to give it to them and not be user-centered for that particular project, which would be a shame. But if the answer is yes, then great, at least you can have that discussion. There's a great book on this called Sense and Respond by Jeff Gotthelf and Josh Seiden. And they detail out in really specific detail even the wording of the contracts they use with their clients to sort of say, here's the contract that says we're going to deliver you this value, and we're going to start off by thinking that the solution might be this. However, either of us can change what that solution will be as we go through this process based on some evidence that we find. That's written into the contract. And the nice thing about that is that you start off by saying, yes, we're probably going to do the thing you've asked for, but we're not definitely going to do that because we might find out something better. And why would you not sign that contract? Because you're either going to get something you've asked for or something better than you asked for, and you're still going to get the value. So I think that for me is a new way of doing a client engagement contract that I haven't seen before.
I was just going to build on that super quickly. I think actually you highlighted there one of the most valuable tools that any designer can have now, which is co-creation. It is more than just co-designing. It's like a stealth organizational change tool. So without giving too many
Not
secrets.
anymore, just told them.
Yeah, I was going to say, without giving too many secrets away, but for the people. So it's really good because it helps you identify the stakeholders that are interested in engaging and the ones that don't want to turn up. It helps you create ownership for the answers. And the earlier you get buy-in for the things you're doing, the more success you have about them actually moving forwards. And then it also just sort of helps you sort of educate why decisions have been made. So there's a whole raft of different reasons why co-creation is super valuable, both with customers and with the stakeholders, and actually across the business. So if you're planning to put something out, you may want to bring some HR in or some IT in or even sales in early on in the co-creation process so they have visibility of what's coming down the pipes that you may need to go and ask them for some help in 6 months' time or whenever the transformation hits that point. But it's a really useful tool. And in other senses, if there's a particularly tricky thing that you've identified in the research that you know is not going to land well, then bring some customers into a co-creation, bring the right people in, and let them hear the customer say that this is crap, or this is just not what we need at all. And have those conversations as difficult as they are as early as possible. But then that co-creation really brings out. So I'd say fundamental skill to develop.
I think just a small build on that in the sense that it's really interesting how not a lot of us are treating clients as like we're all doing research and we know how to do it, but actually. I think from our perspective, what is very important in that relationship building, and that's a lot of that, is to find out how have they burned before, whether they have been burned before in something like this, because that's probably the reason that they would like to sign a certain type of contract to ask for a certain type of deliverables, and figuring that out and understanding and having that very, very honest discussion in the beginning may really, really help that in alignment with all the co-creation and everything that is going to happen. So that's
great. Are there any other questions?
Hi. So I'd like to shift things a little bit to a more personal level, perhaps. Let's see. So we always.
Should we get a drink?
In terms of digital transformation, I think the talk is generally towards what can we do to change them, to transform them, and it's always related to the others, right? The ones that we're going there and trying to change something in the organization to the outside. But my question to you is, what have you changed on your conduct, on your professional lives, to actually implement those transformations, or that to also help generate that digital transformation?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if I'm answering the question specifically, but I guess to make it more personal, for a long time in my career, I kind of like to imagine that we were cartographers and we did a lot of mapping of things. We were creating maps of how things worked and what they did so we could improve them. And then recently I saw a quote, and I can't remember where it's from, but they're sort of saying that the design role now is not really about being the map makers, it's about being compasses. And so we need to be compasses to know how to navigate unknowns, to know how to navigate uncertainty. We don't necessarily need a map, but we do need to have a compass and be that compass to do those things. So I think on a personal level, the sort of changes I've made is a shift away from being quite sort of isolated and insular, and like having started off in advertising, and the goal there was like if you didn't come up with a good idea, you weren't good enough, to moving into products and services where it's like, great, how do you sort of design the great thing, and you go off into your black box of design and do the research and come out and go, ta-da, here it is, through to becoming much more co-creative and collaborative and understanding the softer skills of how organizations work, the nuances that you pick up when you're doing some deep ethnography and you're not just sort of asking someone questions in a lab environment, but you're sitting in their home or in a cafe and watching how they're doing stuff and picking up these sort of more subtle things. I think all of that goes into where designers are more compasses and understanding and observing and feeling out these softer interpersonal skills. And I guess one of my concerns is the sort of the training that happens in education now is not necessarily addressing some of these things. And one of the biggest challenges for new designers coming in is really, design is a massive scale now, and to your point earlier, like the job of a designer is very diverse. You know, it's challenging, you know, coming up with lots of different solutions for many different types of challenges now, and really how do we help designers scale up the responsibilities we now expect them to have, and these softer skills which are really critical to delivering a good project.
Yeah, I would say definitely that. So the soft skills and the leadership skills, I think. So soft skills as in just learning how to listen, you know. The higher you grow in any organization and the more you're expected to kind of transform things and whatever, the more you got to stop trying to have the answers and start listening to the problems, and realizing that people are actually always trying to do the right thing 99% of the time. Maybe there's the odd person, right? So trying to be that collaborative facilitator towards, you know, the compass of the North Star of being a user-centered kind of ethical, digital-focused company, you know. So that, and then from a leadership point of view, stop trying to have the answers entirely. There's a really nice quote about, you know, that leaders stop at, you know, trying to have the answers and instead just ask better questions, you know. So the other side of kind of just intently listening is trying to provoke things to listen to. And so being a leader across the organization, that's the approach. I think that's changed a lot for me, but then also for the people that I work with and my kind of team and stuff is certainly stop trying to have the answers for them and instead create the right environment for people to succeed in and to learn in and feel in. And so that for me is a big change, you know.
Yeah, and I think to build on that, for me, it's exactly what Conor said, and to build on that is really to be okay with I have no idea. With it, I have no idea, I don't know kind of answer, which wasn't really a thing for me. Again, I come from design background, used to being a designer. You do produce solutions, and shifting that mindset from producing and having an answer most of the time to having a very, very broad question, that was a big shift for me. And the second one was just general business language. I never believed in it. It's very, very cold. I'm still struggling with it, as you may have noticed. But it's very, very necessary to learn that and to use that, especially interacting on a certain level and kind of having that impact and having impact to change the organizations and to different kinds of clients. So I would say personally for me, what's things that I'm trying to change is to pick up that business jargon rightfully or wrongfully.
Yeah, I would definitely say that as well. Good one. So that's been a huge kind of tool I've added to my little toolbox in the last number of years is genuinely having those business discussions and not just talking about users, but talking about, you know, what's the retention, the revenue, what's the metrics, what's the churn rate, you know, what's the parrot metrics for this, all that kind of stuff, so that you can actually genuinely empathize with your colleagues who care about that kind of stuff and maybe don't know anything about why they should be, you know, interested in users or design or anything. So if you've already made that first step and you can speak that language and you can kind of talk all of that talk and understand it and link all of your activity to that, that's what they're interested in. And so now you're on the same plane, and then you can talk about the things you care about.
I was just going to add to that. I think, you know, you both made a really good point, and it's one that I've been talking to a lot of the design teams I've been building recently. I got really tired of spending 15, 20 minutes at the start of every meeting trying to explain what design meant, and design doesn't mean a UI and it doesn't mean a wireframe. Design means like everything, and like I'd spend so long explaining it, and I just got really tired of like going, here again, I'm going to explain design for you and try and teach you this vocabulary. And then I realized I'd sort of try and use this metaphor of, you know, if you're on the Pyrenees and you're sort of in France and you're talking to someone in Spain and you're like trying to sell them some cheese or something, and you're just basically going, like, you know, I'm going to teach you French so that I can sell you something. And you go, great, okay, let's go through this rigmarole. Or is it just easier for you to learn Spanish and then communicate to them in their own language to explain the value and the importance of what you're doing? And that was quite a critical shift.
So learn some Spanish. Yeah? That's what you were asking, wasn't it?
Brilliant. Are there any other questions from the crowd?
This question is for Ollie. So you've seen a lot of digital transformations, so changing processes, which means you've seen a lot of people get out of their comfort zone. Do you have any stories of kind of helping change processes within an organization, seeing people outside their comfort zones, and kind of just any stories that are memorable?
I mean, I've got a bad story. I've seen quite a... yeah, I'll tell you that one.
Press pause on the video.
I've seen a lot of change. Largely positive in the sense that you engage people early and starting to talk to them. Learned a lot about working with change management and internal comms teams, really around how to start communicating and what are the softer ways and how to really engage people. The bad story, I was flying out to Australia with a team from Europe. We were looking at just understanding how a business works. This was actually, it was quite an endurance thing, because we'd been around to 10 cities around the world in 5 weeks, starting in New York and ending and sort of going to like Guatemala and then to South Africa and down to Australia. So the team were a little bit jet-lagged and fatigued, and it was the first time they'd been on such an extensive tour of understanding businesses. And we get in there and, like, great, like making friends, finding out where the kitchen is, you know, getting set up. We were there to do a lot of interviews, and we go, oh, what's the Wi-Fi password? And that was where the red flag first should have gone off. The Wi-Fi password was auditors. And we went, okay, that's kind of weird, but maybe it's an old one, and it's fine, we'll just go with that. And then we went through and we started doing a workshop, and they were, you know, to some degree engaged. And then it got to the point that we'd done all the research, we'd done all the playback, we were doing the co-creation. We went, well, let's make this real a bit quicker. Let's do some wireframes of what this product could be like and how you might use it to do your thing. And literally just had someone there cross their arms and go, no, I'm not doing it. And I was like, well, you know what, do you not want to draw? It's like, it's not about being an artist or anything, it's just about community. Like, no, wireframes cost jobs. And I was like, oh, okay. How do I deal with wireframes cost jobs? In reality, I guess they do, and it was just the challenge of how to sort of overcome that and being a bit more sensitive to those sort of things. But also, I think then being a designer and trying to work out, well, actually, how do we create more value for the employees? How do we help them be more productive? And to some degree, some of the stuff is out of our control if they are going to do some downsizing, but also being a lot more sensitive and aware of that and understanding the context of when you're brought in to do some of those things. But yeah, it's an interesting like life lesson that you learn while doing these sort of things.
So lots of agencies over the previous years have been bought by big consultancies or holding companies. What's your sense on how the industry is changing?
it's one that I've been living in quite vigorously for a while now. I was recently doing a talk around what I was calling the design singularity, which is just the impending, eventual demise of the industry, in a positive sense. But really just understanding, well, design has changed. Design at scale has changed. Talent life cycles have changed from education to what is expected of a designer in an organization now, to the types of challenges we get to solve are different now, to the point of design has a seat at the table. There is a huge surge in chief design officers at large global corporations, which is all good, but all of this means is there's a huge demand, like now, for design in lots of different areas it wasn't previously, which means we need different skills, which means we need more designers, and like, where do the next million designers come from? Which means we need to industrialize some of our processes, which I have mixed opinions on. In some senses, it's really good to have processes and methods and outputs, and every method has a template which has a deliverable, because then you can become more efficient, you can understand what you're doing more. But on the flip side of that, I wonder if it reduces or diminishes the creativity of what design is. And then also it sort of restricts the designers to make intuitive leaps within a process, because a process has been sold and methods have been sold and templates have been sold, so you can't like leapfrog forwards. So there's a number of challenges now around the industrialization of design, around the sort of demand for design outweighing the ability to supply it effectively, which gets into the sort of, that how do we really sort of educate the existing designers and teach them the soft skills, teach them how to deal with the new responsibilities and accountabilities that are put on them, as well as the sort of skills they need to evolve, and the practice of design needs to evolve. And I think you said before, is like, design happens whether you're there or not. Some of the scariest moments I've had is when I've walked into a meeting and seen that a whole project has been sort of sold and delivered without a designer being involved at all, because the process is so straightforward to understand and the actions are so straightforward. It really questions what's the value of a designer, and I think that's a great challenge for us to challenge ourselves. Like, how do we bring value as a designer that can't be just sort of understood or sort of processized or industrialized, and we need to evolve the practice of what we're doing as designers.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, Jared Spool's got a great quote. He says that design is the rendering of intent, right? And whether you're there or not, there's always going to be some intent, right? And I guess all of this focus on design and kind of buying up companies and kind of Capital One buying Adaptive Path and kind of IBM having a few thousand designers now that they've trained up. There's an understanding, I guess, in the industry that design is the way to go to try and get close to your customers and to craft the correct things. When it comes to the industrialization of it, it's I guess having that balance between setting up the methods that you go through and the kind of, here's our process and we have a design system that we use and all that kind of stuff, and our pattern libraries, everything. That's all great, because it gets you away from, first of all, it gets everybody involved in design who's not involved in it, right? Because then they can kind of see a pattern library and get involved and go, okay, if I put these two things together, I can create something like you've created. So it opens it up to the rest of the company, and so everybody else can get involved in design without being a designer. So that's the positive kind of side of that thing. And the other side of it, which is a great point about losing the creativity. So I saw a great talk yesterday. I was at the Leading Design conference, and one of the guys from Cap from Google was saying about just his balance of that is, well, do all of that stuff, because of course you need to, because that's the only way you can scale design in a company, is to follow all these kind of processes and methods and do repeatable activity. But the other side is keep design weird, right? Because you're supposed, that was his quote, I thought it was a great quote, just keep design weird. I'm sure there's posters up around his place saying that. I might do that myself. So, but the idea is designers, I hate this phrase, but they think outside the box. They consider things from a different perspective, and that's the kind of, I guess, the companies that are interested in buying up design agencies and bringing in large design input. They're interested in these different perspectives. They're interested in a diversity of opinion. And so just like we need diversity of opinion and viewpoints across our teams, I think companies need diversity of opinion by having designers and by having designers that aren't cookie cutter designers, but are keeping things weird and kind of thinking things differently, but also being inclusive in their weirdness, rather than kind of, we're designers and you can't think like we do. It's kind of trying to bring that in so that the rest of the company understands and believes in that way of thinking.
And another perspective on this is that any merger and acquisitions that I've seen is definitely, it's a culture clash, right? There are two companies joining in, and one or the other, the way they're going to have their own similarities or differences, and very often different focuses. So I think there's so much potential for transformation there. So in a way, for our jobs, that's exactly the target market, if you like, because that is kind of exactly what does need transforming. And whilst sometimes they do have a plan for it, and sometimes they completely don't, I definitely seen kind of these kind of things in the past in terms of cultures clashing and people are not being sure anymore what business are they a part of. And I think building that new culture takes time, and businesses need to acknowledge that. I'm very curious to see in terms of design companies now via acquisitions growing into like the size of corporations. But I think as a reaction to that, you can see a lot of really small, really crazy, weird kind of shops and agencies appearing. So it's a great balance, but they do need to acknowledge that they do need transformation specialists.
I think just sort of building on that lastly, the simplest way I found of boiling that down is really looking at consultancies and the sort of the acquisition companies dealing very precise answers. They're paid to deliver a precise answer. Design agencies are generally delivered to find an unknown answer or to sort of navigate an uncertainty. And that kind of creates a clash in itself from the way that they approach the work, the skills that they have in doing it, the way that they interact with clients. Which then internally impacts the culture and the way that they operate. So you can't sometimes even sit in the same room because you have very different methodologies, very different approaches. So when you're working with places that are on the hook for delivering a precise answer, and you're going to come in and say, well, we don't know what the answer is, but hey, we can figure that out. You need to really understand how to work well together and sort of balance out those things.
Have you seen the teapot model? Oh, look it up. You'll like it. It's that. Right? And it's the question you asked earlier, how do you sell something without having a solution that's part of it? Look up the teapot model. So you can see a teapot over a hill. I'll not ruin it for you, but look it up. It's nice.
Okay, thanks everyone. I think that's we're nearing the end of this. I don't know if there's. Do you feel you've got some answers out of these guys today? So the sort of human side of digital transformation. Is there any burning questions left that anyone wants to ask before we sort of come to a close? No? You're all good? Tried this yesterday, and it was quite a challenge, but I will try it again today, worded in a slightly different way. So what advice would you give your 50-year-old self? Who wants to go first on that one?
Well, I guess
Lottery numbers, isn't it?
Yeah. Lottery numbers, that's a good one. It kind of trumps what I was going to go for. I think if I was 50 years old, I'd be like, you really work on the life-work balance. There is enough work out there to do, and finding the right balance is probably the most critical part. And, finding a way of educating and finding sort of, ways of evolving what you're doing as well as delivering work is good, but the kind of well-being and the sort of finding that balance in life is quite a critical part to it, and it's never too early to start finding balance.
Awesome. Aleks?
There is a little left, use it wisely.
Very good. And you've already done yours, Conor, haven't you? What was it, 6?
Yeah, 11 numbers,
9?
12. Yeah. Was that last program? I would say it's kind of not what you're creating, but how you created it and how you did it together with people. That's what you're going to kind of, at 50 years time, that's what you're going to care about. Is how did you get on, and were you an absolute tool to work with? Did people actually enjoy being around you? That's what people kind of remember, right? What's that quote? People remember how you made them feel, not what you said, right? So I think that's the important thing is how you get there, how you do your work with your colleagues rather than what you create. That's kind of less important.
Amazing, thank you. So fantastic discussion, and really appreciate your time to sort of give us an insight into where you think we're going and what's happening here in the world around design. Some sort of key takeaways. So culture is how the company makes decisions. Transformation is continual. It's not change people dislike, it's being changed. Design happens whether you take part or not. Leaders, stop trying to have the answers, just ask better questions, and please keep design weird. So thanks, guys. A little round of applause for the panelists, and thanks for today.